Okay, we looked at the first example of a full pass-through. So that's where you're changing the price just enough where you get back to exactly where you started with. And again, in the spreadsheet sense, that's where we're trying to get these two numbers to be exactly the same. We're changing the price in such a way that these numbers, these dollar profits, there's no effect. There's no change after everything is said and done. What I want to look at now is another possible response, and that is that you raise the price in England, but not by the full amount of the currency change. So it's basically a way to partially claw back some of the money that you'd be losing from the competitive effect. And so let's again look at the spreadsheet example here. We're going to march down here to a partial pass-through, and again we're going to assume no elasticity. That means you raise the price, but you sell exactly the same number of units. So here we've got the same baseline. Now we're going to have 10,000 units at 67 pounds per. So our revenues are 670,000, costs are 571. Our pound profit is 98,000. It's down 15%. And then our dollar profit, after you take into account the currency effect, we're down 21% from where we started. So this is a partial pass-through of the cost increase, and it's less painful, this note here, less painful than it would have been without the pass-through. So again, if we go back up to the original scenario, we're down 37% if we keep our price exactly the same. If we can somehow pass along some of the price increase, well, this is the entire increase, so we have no effect. We raise prices enough where we're not affected at all. That's probably a bit of a stretch of credulity, so we can here raise the prices a little bit and make the pain a little bit less severe than it would have otherwise been. Again, this assumes no elasticity. That may be a bit of a stretch, so let's go down here to assume a bit of elasticity. And we've got, again, the same starting point. Now we're going to assume that if we raise prices, there's going to be some deterioration in the demand for our product. And I picked an arbitrary number here, 9,000 units at 67 pounds per. Our revenues then are going to be the product of those two numbers, right? So we have 603,000 in revenues. Our costs for this pound profit is down 73% now. And in terms of dollars, we're down 75%. So we've been hurt both competitively because we've lost sales. We're trying to claw back some of that money that we would have otherwise had. And we're also hurt with the conversion. Now, clearly, this is worse than the base case. If we go all the way again back up here, where we just ate it, right? We didn't try to mess with the prices. This would clearly be a better response from the company standpoint. Let's just keep the prices the same. Let's keep selling the same number of units that we have, and we're down 37%. That's bad, but it's not nearly as bad as this scenario here, where we raise the prices a little bit, but we lose 10% of our sales, and we get clobbered. So these are the different possible responses, the different outcomes, and there's always a competitive effect and a currency effect. All right, let's look at the big idea here. The changes in exchange rates can affect the competitive position of the firm in the market, so that's the competitive effect. And then we have this little note here, the firm doesn't have to be an international firm, and this is really important. It doesn't have to be an international firm to be affected. If you compete in a market where there are international firms, then you are still exposed to the competitive effect of these exchange rate changes. And we're going to look at some examples perhaps now. So as an example, let's just think about a building products firm based in the US. All of their materials, all of their costs, all of their sales are in domestic terms. Everything is in dollars. But if you compete against an international firm, let's say it's a Mexican firm, for example, if the dollar gets stronger against the Mexican peso, then the foreign firm is going to benefit because their sales are going to be cheaper. The price of their goods are going to be cheaper in dollar terms, right? So they can kind of outcompete you. They can drop their prices and still end up with the same number of pesos that they had before. Whereas if they're dropping their prices, you become less competitive and you either have to drop your prices or suffer lost sales. Either way, your revenues are going down. And again, you're not exposed to Mexican peso costs. You're not selling in Mexico, but just because you compete against an international firm, you've been exposed to this competitive effect. On the other hand, if the dollar gets weaker against the foreign currency, the dollar got weaker against the peso, for instance, then you are going to benefit. Your goods are going to sell for less than the Mexican firm, or they're going to get eaten up. Their profits are going to go down. So you're better off than you were before. Again, you're an all U.S. firm. competing in an international market. So let's look at some dollar examples here. The U.S. firm sells a deluxe bathroom package that includes drywall, fixture, ceramic tile, etc. Everything is made in the USA. It sells for $2,500 and the costs are $1,750. So for every unit, this firm is making $750. We have a Mexican firm selling the same package in the U.S. However, its costs are mainly paid in peso. Their costs are 31,500 pesos. The current exchange rate we'll assume is 18 pesos per dollar. So their costs are exactly the same in dollar terms as the U.S. firm. So if we divide 31,500 by 18, we get $1,750. So right now, everything is kind of, we're at equilibrium, right? Our costs are the same in dollar terms. Our sales, the price in the U.S. market is exactly the same. So everything is kind of hunky-dory. Now, suppose that the dollar appreciates and the exchange rate goes to 20 pesos per dollar. So that just hurt the U.S. firm in a competitive position. What happens is, and how that plays out, is the Mexican firm's costs in dollar terms are now less. They're now $1,575. So they're making an extra $175 for every deluxe bathroom packages that they sell. So what are some possible responses by the Mexican firm in a competitive industry when it's faced with this situation? Well, I could think of a couple. One would be to keep my price the same and start banking that extra money. Or, and this is probably more likely response, I'm going to drop my prices some to grab more market share. You know, if my prices go down by $100, let's say, I'm still making 75 more than I was before, but in a competitive industry, competitive marketplace, I'm likely to grab market share. You know, if you go to Home Depot and you can buy a bathroom set from one company for $2,500 and the exact same stuff for $2,400, it's likely that you will go and buy the cheaper thing, right? If assuming the quality and everything else is the same, you try to grab market share. And so this would hurt the U.S. firm. So clearly the situation would be reversed if the dollar was depreciating. Everything else would kind of flip on its head. The American firm would be better off. Maybe they're going to drop their price to grab market share. Again, the point is, just because you're totally a U.S. firm does not mean you're insulated completely from international competitive effects, especially if you're competing against firms that are international. All right. So besides the competitive effect, there is also the conversion effect. We've already looked at that. Maybe we'll look at an example here in a second. But the cash flows that you're converting back to your home currency are being affected by the changes in the exchange rates. And so the total effect is going to be the combination of this competitive effect and this conversion effect. So let's go down here and look again at a Mexican firm. All right, this first example here assumes that the Mexican firm doesn't do anything in response to the cost changes. They leave their price alone. And what happens is their Mexican peso profits go through the roof, right? Before, their sales were 2.5 million. Assuming they're selling 1,000 units, their sales in peso terms was 45 million. Their costs were 31.5 million. Again, if we go up, this is just a continuation of this example up here. And so their gross profit, 13.5 million pesos. If we look at what happens after the dollar appreciates, the Mexican peso depreciates, they're still selling 1,000 units, still getting $2.5 million from that. But when they convert that to pesos, now it's 50 million pesos. Their costs remain 31.5 million. So their profits have gone from 13 to 18 million if they don't do anything kind of from a competitive standpoint, if they just kind of pocket all that extra money that they're making. However, in this case, they're just enjoying the currency effect, but they could enjoy the combined effects of kind of a competitive change and then the currency change. So let's look at what would happen if they perhaps drop their price. Oh, even the $100 that I mentioned. They drop their price to $2,400 and they get a little bit of extra market share. So the assumption here is that they go from 1,000 units to 1,300 units, and that would be the capacity that they can run at. That's the assumption. So again, before everything else, if we march through everything, 13.5 million was where they were. Now they're going to sell everything cheaper but more units. So their gross sales go to $3.12 million. If If we convert that to pesos, it's 62 million. Their costs go up, right, because they're selling more units, more capacity, so their costs have increased. But their peso profits now are 21 million, so not quite a clean double, but definitely more than if they just kind of pocketed the extra money from the currency effect. So there's a competitive effect, the currency effect, and if we have both of those happening at the same time, we have a combined effect. So I'm going to stop here. We'll pick up with looking at these determinants of operating exposure in the next video, and I'll see you then.